Ladies and gentlemen, a very warm welcome to you here at the Athens Democracy Forum. My name is Farah Nayeri. I'm a journalist for the New York Times, and I'm also the author of the upcoming book, Takedown. And I have a podcast called Culture Blast. The man I'm about to speak to today requires absolutely no introduction. He is probably one of the most widely read authors on the planet. He has published many books, and of those books, I would say 35 million copies have been sold to date in 65 countries. That man is Yuval Noah Harari. A couple of years ago, Yuval teamed up with my other two guests to produce the graphic novel version of Sapiens. The first volume came out in 2020, and the second volume, The Pillars of Civilization, is coming out now. The two men who made it happen, David Vandermeulen and Daniel Casanave, are with me here today. Welcome to you all.
Thank you.
Yuval, I thought I would start this conversation by asking you to tell us a little bit the story of how this graphic novel came about, how and when you got the idea, and how you teamed up with David and Daniel.
Well, it's the result of the meeting of a couple of minds, actually. I mean, after the publication of Sapiens, my husband Itzik, who is very fond of comics and actually taught comics, he had this wish to turn Sapiens into a graphic novel or a comic book, but we weren't really sure how. I mean, I don't know how to draw. And after some years, we got this idea, this invitation from David and Daniel, that they also came across the book and they wanted to turn it into a graphic novel. Oh. So it was kind of a perfect match.
So they had the spontaneous idea at their end?
Yes.
Oh.
And they approached us, and this is something that we wanted to do for a long time. I mean, the basic idea is to reach new audiences.
Right.
That, you know, Sapiens is a popular science book, but it's 400 and something pages of text. And this is something that a lot of people find daunting. Mm-hmm. And the idea was to reach new audiences with the latest discoveries, ideas of science about who we are and how Sapiens was transformed from an insignificant African ape into the ruler of the world. This is something that is of interest to everybody. And we experimented with this new way of telling history, of telling science.
Yeah. And I wanted to ask the same question of Daniel and David. Daniel and David, I just wanted to know your side of the story. We heard from Yuval that you had the idea for this graphic novel independently. And David, can you explain to us how you came to creating this work?
En fait, on a lu Sapiens simultanément, David et moi, mais comme lecteur. Et un jour, David m'a dit, on était chez moi, il me dit ça serait formidable qu'on puisse l'adapter en bande dessinée. Mais c'était comme un rêve, en fait. Et bizarrement, enfin, pas bizarrement, Martin Zeller, notre éditeur qui était alors chez Casterman et qui montait une nouvelle production de bande dessinée chez Albin Michel, sa maison d'édition, nous a proposé d'adapter tous les deux le texte de Yuval.
Oui, c'était un alignement de planètes assez étonnant parce que c'était vraiment tout à fait... on n'y croyait pas en fait. On avait lu ça vraiment de notre côté. Et moi j'avais dit à Daniel, il faut faire ça, ce serait formidable à faire parce que c'est impossible à faire.
Why was it impossible to do?
Parce que c'est trop grand, trop vaste. C'est un énorme projet que la bande dessinée est quand même à la base un art de synthèse. C'était un défi en tout cas. Et ce que Daniel et moi nous adorons faire, c'est nous donner des défis, des choses difficiles à faire. Et je pense que quelques jours après que nous nous sommes dit ça, Martin nous le proposait et on a cru presque à une blague.
Before we get to the finishing of the work. Let's go back to the beginning of this. And I believe that, Daniel, you're from Reims, which is Champagne country in France, so lucky you. And David is from Belgium, where the beer is particularly good. So as you were saying to me before off stage, it's champagne and beer. And you guys, you know...
Ça aide à avoir beaucoup d'idées, évidemment. C'est bien pour les idées, c'est plus facile.
It's good, as you say, effervescent, sparkly. It brings sparkle to your ideas. So Daniel, you are the man who actually did the drawings, and David did the text for this graphic novel, and of course they're derived from Yuval's book. And I'm about to come back to Yuval in just a moment, but Daniel, I was wondering how you came up with these ideas of how to illustrate, because you know, I see influences in your drawings. I see sometimes this figure inspired by Batman. I see some figures that are inspired maybe by the Flintstones. I mean, there were all kinds of ideas that went into your illustration, and I just wondered if you could explain how you came up with these different characters. Because one of the characters is Yuval, and he is Uncle Yuval, and then one of the characters is Yuval's nephew, and then we have a biologist, but there are all kinds of different characters in this book.
Pour reprendre, c'est ensuite... nous avons rencontré Yuval. Nous sommes allés à Tel Aviv pour rencontrer Yuval. On ne s'était jamais rencontrés. Et David avait commencé à proposer un scénario. On a travaillé ensemble, tous les trois, et plus l'équipe de Yuval, plus avec Martin. Yuval a créé aussi certains de ces personnages qui sont dans notre bande dessinée. Mais la plupart des personnages nouveaux, c'est David qui les a amenés. Et raconte-nous comment.
Oui, en fait, il fallait que la parole du texte de Yuval soit incarnée, et il fallait que ce soit des personnages qui incarnent la parole, pas mettre un carton off et une image. Évidemment, on utilise ce procédé-là de temps en temps dans le livre, mais au maximum, il faut créer des personnages. D'ailleurs, au tout début, Yuval ne voulait pas il n'était pas très chaud pour qu'on le représente comme personnage, parce que ça, c'est toute l'humilité de Yuval qui souhaite ne pas se mettre trop en avant. Mais on l'a quand même insisté pour qu'il fasse partie des personnages, parce qu'on savait qu'on allait faire 5 volumes de bande dessinée, c'est-à-dire 1000 pages, et il fallait trouver une galerie de personnages, une galerie de personnages pour donner la parole de tout ce grand texte, pour évidemment offrir de la variété aux lecteurs. Et donc voilà, ainsi on a inventé, imaginé des personnages. Yuval en a trouvé pas mal, comme Dr. Fiction ou d'autres. Et puis alors on a aussi essayé de faire des clins d'œil aux Flintstones, à plein de choses. Aussi trouver des idées pour que ce soit des personnages qui soient appréhendés facilement par le monde entier, en fait. C'est toute la difficulté du travail aussi en bande dessinée, c'est de montrer par l'image, mais que ces images soient compréhensibles en même temps en Chine, au Pérou, en Scandinavie, en France, en Angleterre, et ça, c'est très difficile à faire.
And they said because you were kind of humble, you didn't really want to be in the limelight of your own graphic novel. Is that true?
Yeah, I mean, in the original Sapiens, in the book, I don't appear.
Right.
And to suddenly focus the book on me as a character that goes around and explains everything, it seemed to be wrong, especially because science doesn't work like this. It's not like you have a single scientist who understands everything and explains everything. Science is always the work of a community. I personally there is a lot in the book about genetics and biology. I don't know genetics. Like there is a lot about archaeology. I've never conducted an archaeological excavation. So I said the compromise was, okay, I'll be in the book as long as I'm not the only one. we'll have a group of scientists who represent different disciplines. So I'm there as a historian, but you also have Professor Saraswati, and she's the biologist and the geneticist. And you have somebody who is an anthropologist, an archaeologist, and things like that. And a lot of things are explained through a dialogue or even an argument between different scientists, different scholars. And then, of course, you have all the other characters. Some of them, and you know, the advantage is, yes, we need a lot of characters, but we have the entire human history to choose from. So like in the second volume, we have Kafka, and we have John Lennon, and we have Margaret Thatcher, explaining or showing us different aspects of history. And then we can invent characters. So for instance, we have Detective Lopez, who is a fictional character, but she's a detective who investigates the biggest crimes in human history. And in volume 2, she investigates the crime of inequality and hierarchy. And of course, her boss
including
objects.
inequality between men and women, right?
Including inequality between men and women and slavery and so forth. So she investigates. Who is responsible for this? I mean, we are the police, supposedly. We should investigate crime. This is the biggest crime in history. Nobody is investigating it. I'll investigate it. Where is this coming from? And this gives us the kind of funny and accessible narrative way to introduce readers to some very difficult scientific and also ethical issues about inequality and hierarchy in human history.
I also wondered, because these two gentlemen, they came to Tel Aviv, they said, they visited you and you got together and put your heads together. How was their trip to Tel Aviv? What did you guys do?
We mainly talked. I mean, you know, like we sat together in around this table and we brainstormed, half in English and half in French, about the different plots and different characters. I mean, how, like Dr. Fiction, I mean, when we first came with this idea of, okay, we need to personify the human ability to create fictional stories and mythologies, which is the basis for all human cooperation. So we had a very long discussion how to present it in a graphic novel. And then finally we had this idea, we can use the genre of superheroes. And we'll just have a superhero to personify the human superpower of imagining stories and fictions and mythologies, everything from gods to money, which is also a fiction. And then we had a long discussion about how it will look. So should it be a male figure or a female figure superhero or a transgender or non-binary superhero? And then we had a long discussion around that. And so, you know, it takes a long time to make these decisions.
And I'm going to ask them also, Daniel and David, how was your trip to Tel Aviv? Can you tell us the story of your first time you met Yuval and when you sat down and discussed the book?
C'était presque scolaire.
C'était studieux.
Très studieux. Et oui, parce qu'on travaillait vraiment intensément à trouver les idées. Alors, c'est amusant parce que là, récemment, on vient de refaire une séance de travail. Mais cette séance de travail était beaucoup plus aussi facile parce qu'on a deux livres derrière nous, on travaille le troisième et on a trouvé de très très bonnes idées assez facilement alors qu'on était parti peut-être sur des mauvaises pistes au début et puis on a compris qu'on allait faire quelque chose de bien. On était très contents de cette réunion, mais la première fois qu'on s'est vus, on avait tout à faire, tout à construire, tout à prouver. Et ça, c'était peut-être un gros défi, évidemment.
I also wanted to know the language barrier, because Yuval understands some French. He seems to maybe even speak a little bit. You understand a little bit of English, so how did you work?
On a de la chance d'avoir Martin qui traduit, ou Lorraine, et qui nous aide bien.
On est accompagné de
traducteurs. Parce que notre pauvre anglais et l'anglais et le français de Yuval ne suffiraient pas pour qu'on puisse vraiment...
A lot of hand gestures.
Et par les mains, ça a ses limites, quoi.
Yeah.
Actually, with the second volume, we had this big problem of the COVID-19 pandemic, because with the first volume, it was relatively easy to fly and to meet. But most of volume 2 was created while we are in lockdown, and we can't meet. And it's much more difficult to communicate this way, so it was a big problem. And you know, ironically, an important part of volume 2 deals with the emergence of pandemics as a result of the agricultural revolution. So we were actually experiencing what we are writing about.
Amazing, amazing. I mean, obviously, you're going to be carrying on the collaboration with these two gentlemen, and there will be 3 more volumes?
Yes.
And what themes will those volumes have?
So the next volume will be basically about the unification of humankind and what happens when different... I mean, volume 2 is about how you create a human society based on agriculture.
Yeah.
But then all over the world, you see the emergence of different societies. What happens when they collide? So this is volume 3, and it talks about empires and religions and the spread of empires and religions.
Right.
And then volumes 4 and 5 are about the scientific revolution and the early modern world, and about our world today, and also a bit about the future.
Okay. I have a question for you, Daniel. Yes. Because you can draw, and I can't draw, and so I am in complete admiration.
Vous ne travaillez pas assez. Tout le monde peut dessiner.
In front of anyone who can draw as well as you can. And so I wondered, you draw everything by hand. How did you do these incredible, you know, sketches and characters? How long does it take, for instance, to do... how long did it take to do the drawings for volume 2?
11 months.
Yeah, 11 months. Yeah, because it's a lot
On
of
l'appelle
drawing.
Dany la flèche dans le métier.
How
Il va
many
très, très
pages?
vite.
How many pages is it?
240.
240 pages. Yeah, that's a lot of drawings.
Ouais. Et oui, et c'est là encore, c'est un défi parce que dans le métier, un livre, une bande dessinée de 240 pages, c'est des auteurs mettent 2 à 3 ans. Nous, on a mis la barre assez haut pour essayer de faire ça en 1 an. Et c'est un vrai défi de tenir le rythme qui est très
Soutenu.
Très soutenu, un rythme très soutenu. On doit chercher cette tension dans le travail pour avoir une acuité bien suffisante pour pouvoir être au niveau et de faire quelque chose de bien, en fait.
C'est pour cela que je trouve c'est un livre formidable.
So yes, I
Oui,
mean,
c'est ça.
why do you like it?
Oui, c'est un peu la même chose. C'est vrai que moi, quand j'ai lu le livre, je me suis dit, waouh, c'est un des livres de sciences humaines les plus importants que j'ai lus dans ces 10 dernières années. Parce que c'est le génie de Yuval, c'est de savoir synthétiser plein d'idées en anthropologie, en histoire, en biologie, en théologie, plein de choses qu'il a été puisé chez plein d'auteurs différents, mais c'est son idée de la vision et de la synthèse de l'évolution de notre humanité. Ça, c'est très, très fort. Un livre très appréciable aussi pour nous d'en faire quelque chose de bande dessinée, parce qu'on va sur tous les continents du monde, on va dans toutes les époques, on va de moins 70 000 à aujourd'hui, il n'y a pas, on peut tout dessiner. On peut dessiner l'humanité entière, la Terre entière.
I also wanted to ask you, and please be honest, even though he's sitting here, I wanted to know how it was to work with Yuval. Was he easy to work with? Difficult to work with?
Non, alors ce qui est fantastique avec Yuval, c'est que, parce qu'on a déjà travaillé avec beaucoup de spécialistes, Daniel et moi, avant, et on avait cette idée que peut-être on allait travailler avec Yuval, on allait travailler dans notre coin et Yuval allait valider, dire oui, yes, no. En fait, ça ne s'est pas du tout passé comme ça. Yuval s'est investi dans le travail dès le début et il est partie prenante du scénario, de la bande dessinée, et il est très très présent. Et ce qui est même encore plus formidable, c'est que Yuval, avec cette bande dessinée, c'est même un Sapiens augmenté, puisque Yuval se prend en jeu et apporte des nouveaux passages, des nouvelles petites conclusions, des nouveaux exemples.
Qui ne sont pas dans le livre.
Qui ne sont pas dans le livre.
I want to hear from Daniel. Was it easy working with Yuval because you're a visual guy? Yuval is an ideas guy.
En fait, Yuval, il ne m'a jamais réellement... Moi, c'est surtout David qui travaille directement avec Yuval.
Ouais.
Moi, je travaille plutôt avec David et je sais les remarques que dit Yuval à David. Donc, on n'est pas tout à fait en direct, Yuval et moi. Donc, je ne sais pas tout à fait ce qu'il pense des dessins.
So Yuval, what do you think of his drawings? Because he says, I'm not quite sure what Yuval thinks of my drawings because we never work directly.
No, we work a lot together, but I mean, for me, the amazing thing about the drawings is that it, as you said, that I'm more of an ideas guy, I don't know how to draw. And the problem with ideas, they tend to be too abstract. And when you are not sure of something, you often hide behind abstractions. And with words, you can do that. If you're not sure of something, you just kind of mess with the language and it's okay. But in drawings, it has to be concrete. You have to commit yourself to something. And this kind of obligation to be concrete is extremely important to test whether you really understand what you're trying to say, because you can't hide behind abstract language. So even in, like you talk about the beginning of agriculture in this volume, and you have to draw it. So you draw like the first farmers. And then you have to decide whether you draw men and women together in the field, or just men, or just women. You can't just have general people. Now, this forces you to go back to the scholarship and examine what do we know about gender relations at the beginning of the agricultural revolution. Was farming a man's job, a women's job, or it's done together? You can't hide behind, it was just, people did it. And for me as a scholar, it was a very important, very, very good challenge.
Yeah, gender is a really important point that you bring up in your book and in the graphic novel. And to me, it's fantastic because you basically say that the feminist revolution is one of the great revolutions in history, and it happened bloodlessly.
Yeah, that's the amazing thing about it. We tend to think that revolutions have to be bloody. Like all these, if you want to make an omelette, you have to break a few eggs and things like that. And when people think about revolution, they think about the French Revolution with the guillotines and the Bolshevik Revolution with the Gulag. But then the feminist revolution, the amazing thing about it, it not only changed something so fundamental about human society, but it did so with almost no violence. I mean, there was violence against the people who tried to make the changes, but they themselves, they did not start any wars, they didn't assassinate anybody, they didn't build concentration camps, and they still managed to change the world.
Yeah. I was going to ask David and Daniel, what do you think of the ideology that Yuval communicates in his book? Because Yuval is a very open-minded guy. He believes in the feminist revolution, he embraces gender equality, all kinds of forms of equality, and I wondered how you felt about his politics, because his worldview is very open and very liberal, or however you want to describe it.
Finalement, ça nous
correspond bien.
Ça nous correspond tout à fait. En fait, c'était pas le point de vue politique de Yuval, pour nous, c'est pas du tout exotique. C'est un point de vue qu'on partage assez naturellement, en fait. C'est vrai que peut-être ce sont des choses qui ne se disent pas autant. Mais je pense que c'est un livre très salutaire aussi, d'autant plus, c'est peut-être aussi ça qui nous a intéressés de travailler Sapiens, c'est que c'est un livre qui actuellement est salutaire et qui est intéressant que les jeunes générations et la bande dessinée, on sait que les jeunes générations sont, c'est notre public aussi. Eh bien voilà, c'est bien qu'on leur répète et qu'on leur dit ces messages-là.
I just wondered, why you've decided to address a young adult readership. Is it because, as the New Yorker magazine wrote in their profile of you, you are relentless in the search for an audience?
I think my business as a public intellectual, as a historian, is to build a bridge between the scientific community and the general public. And I try to reach as wide an audience as possible so that people will know of the latest ideas and theories of science and be able to take part in this conversation. I think that everybody has a story in their mind about the history of humankind. There isn't a person on Earth that doesn't have some story in the mind about it.
Yeah.
I mean, people may not have a story about a particular event. Many people have no story about, I don't know, Poland in the Middle Ages. Nothing in their mind about it. But about the history of humankind, everybody has a story. And if you don't try to engage the story, it just means that you leave there a vacuum that other stories will fill in. And the only thing that can replace an existing story is a new story. Scientists sometimes make the mistake that they think they can change the public opinion with the just facts and statistics and graphs, and it usually doesn't work. Because as an animal, we are a storytelling animal. We think in stories, not in facts, not in statistics, not in graphs, most of us. So I see my job as a storyteller, basically. And if you just limit yourself to a small audience, then you leave the rest of the audience with the old stories.
Yeah. Is it also because you're trying to, this is a cynical question, but are you trying to attract these young readers, these young adult readers, so they read your graphic novels first and then they graduate into buying your books and all that? You know, I mean, is it a marketing kind of
there are
ploy?
much easier ways to make money.
Yeah.
Then, I mean, after working for these 2 years on these 2 volumes, there are much easier ways to make money than to create a graphic novel. Right. And also, I don't see it as specifically for young adults. I think that this is a genre which is, for adults.
For adults as well,
as well. It's not just for teenagers or people in their
Absolutely.
20s.
And I also wanted to know, because you're a university professor, right? You're still teaching actively. I imagine you like, obviously, teaching young people, and you like being in the presence of young people, and you like transmitting to young people, right?
No, because it's more challenging.
Oh, really? Why?
They bring new ideas. They bring a completely new understanding of the world. And also because of their place in the world, they ask much harder questions.
How so?
Because, by the time you're 50 or 60, you kind of have your view of the world. You kind of are settled down. You made your big choices most of the time.
Right.
So you naturally tend to be far more conservative.
Right.
When you're 20, the big choices are still ahead of you, and also more is at stake for you. I mean, the future of humanity, the future of the world, distresses people in their teens and 20s far more, because they are the people who are going to face the consequences.
Yes, especially since we live in very distressing times. These poor youngsters, they've been through 18 months, if not longer, of COVID-19, locked down and being locked at home, not being able to go to university, not being able to come to their professors such as you. And so it's a really bleak kind of world that lies ahead for them. And
I'm not
also,
sure if it's bleak. I mean, it has a lot of positive options as well. But what is certain is that it's an extremely a fluid world.
yeah,
It's really an unknown world.
Yeah.
It's the first time in history where nobody has any idea how the world would look like in 10 or 20 years. I mean, obviously, at any point in history, you can't predict the future. There could always be an epidemic, a war, an earthquake, whatever.
Yeah.
But the basic structures of society, of the economy, of the political system, they don't change so fast. Now they change incredibly fast. So even basic questions like what skills, as a young person, what skills I should learn in order to have a good job
Right.
in 20 years, nobody has any idea.
yeah.
We don't know how the job market would look like.
Well, that's pretty bleak. You know, that's a depressing prognosis for a young kid to hear. And you have many more depressing prognoses in your books because you say in 200 years, Homo sapiens will be no more, will be gone, and we don't know what will be in our place. The computers are going to turn humans into something else. And that you also say on your website, history began when humans invented gods and will end when humans become gods.
Yeah.
So this is all kind of, you know, it scares me, and I'm not 20 years old, you know.
It is scary, but the
Yeah.
fact is, I mean, again, it's not kind of a metaphor. If you think about what gods are, what are the abilities of gods, above all, the ability to create and recreate life, we are now acquiring exactly these abilities. When I say that humans are becoming God, it's not a metaphor. These are the abilities that we are increasingly acquiring. And I think that given the pace of progress of technology, it's a conservative estimate that in 200 years, with the new powers of biotechnology and bioengineering and artificial intelligence, we will be able to create new life forms. We will be able to reshape humanity, to reshape our bodies, our brains, our minds, so that we will be completely different entities. When I say that Homo sapiens will disappear, I don't mean that there'll be some big disaster and everybody will die. That can also happen, of course. But I think it's more likely that the new technology will enable us to start changing our bodies, our brains and minds until the new entities are not Homo sapiens. They are something more different from us than we are different from chimpanzees or Neanderthals. If you compare sapiens and Neanderthals, we are extremely similar. There are very small differences in DNA, in brain structure between us. We share a lot of our emotional life, of our physical abilities. You look 100 or 200 years to the future, and it is likely that the planet will be dominated by beings who are not even organic. I mean, we are still very similar to amoebas in a sense because they are organic, we are organic. Hey, it's the same thing.
Right.
In 200 years, it's likely that the dominant life forms will not be organic. So it's something far more different. And I don't think this is it's not necessarily scary. It's just the way things are. And we should come to terms with it. And we should think, what do we want to do with these divine powers? And part of the rationale of writing these books is to understand what to do with this power. We need to understand who we are, how we got here.
Right.
And that's kind of the deep logic behind writing these books and trying to reach as wide an audience as possible, because we don't want the decisions about the future of life to be made by a handful of tycoons and politicians who don't necessarily represent everybody.
Right. Thank you very much for concluding this talk so well, much better than I would have done. And I wanted to thank you, Yuval Noah Harari, David Vandermeulen, and Daniel Casanave for being with me here today. Thank you so very much. Thank you.
Thank you.